Now before you go home today, okay, you're going to know exactly what's on the quiz for next week. Okay, and we're going to kind of start right here. Now that we know that how many cells there are, we have a feel for that, we kind of understand the variety here. What I want us to be able to do now is look at some cells and be able to identify some of the organelles that are found in a cell. This will set you up to do well in physiology and in microbiology and on beyond. Okay, so many of the things we do here are the foundation for many of the things you'll do in some other classes. So you're always helping yourself when you do well here, because you're making life that much better. You're making yourself smarter in the next class. You're making the next classes easier for yourself than if you don't do well here. You always want to put your best into this. So I have listed here 12 parts of a cell. And what I want you to know is that 5 of the questions on the quiz on Wednesday, 5 of the questions on the quiz next week are going to be identifying these parts of the cell. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of those 8 pictures that you have. You've got 8 of them. I'm just going to randomly pick one of them. I'm going to put it on the quiz, and I'm going to point to its organelles. I'm going to point to 5 of the organelles in the picture and ask you to tell me the name of those. Now, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's 12 things to know. I'm going to point at 5 of them. You should be able to write their names for me. Everybody with me? That's half the quiz. So what I want to do right now is just kind of for us to walk through these 12 parts of the cell and make sure that we feel pretty comfortable with studying them and locating them, okay? What? You have 7. Some of you may not have picked, there were a few that ran out. Does everybody have 8? Yeah. So if you have 7, they're still over here. If you want to see, if you missed picking up one of them, then make sure you pick up that one that you're missing. Okay, so let's look at this cell structure. And just to begin, let's go back to the light microscope for just a minute before we get right into the ones that you have. When people first came up with a cell theory and they were looking at cells under the microscope, they could identify 3 basic parts to the cell. You could see that there was a boundary, that this cell was separate from everything around it because there was obviously an outside edge to it. Now, not just a thin little edge, but if this thing is 3-dimensional, kind of be like the shell of an egg, or it's not hard. And they simply called that the cell membrane. There was obviously some sort of boundary, some sort of structure that surrounded the cell and kept the insides in and the outsides out, kind of like your skin does on your body. They also saw that there was at least one large, fairly recognizable object in the cell. They couldn't really discern a lot about it, but they could see that it was distinct. If they applied a stain to the cell, which is often done, it typically would stain fairly dark, and they called that the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus of the cell. And then they just termed everything else inside the cell except for the nucleus. They called that the cytoplasm, which is a word that just means cell stuff. The light microscope does not show you the organelles. You can't see the organelles there. All the organelles that are in the cytoplasm here just look like a bunch of goop. Looks like somebody spit or something. It's just sort of transparent stuff. So it was always called cytoplasm. This is why it was very hard until the electron microscope. It was very difficult to know how the cell was doing what it does because we couldn't see the structure. We could observe cells and see that they were doing certain things, but how they did it and what the parts were that were doing that were basically unknown until the electron microscope. And that's when cells started looking like this. And you can still label these three parts here, right? You can still have, the cell membrane would be this outer edge of the cell, right? Because this is outside the cell, this is inside the cell. So you can see a cell membrane here, right? This large object right here is the nucleus, and then all the rest of this is cytoplasm. But now we can see distinct objects in the cytoplasm. Two, make sure that you understand when you look at this picture where it came from. This picture that you're looking at is basically a photograph, what you would think of as a photograph. If somebody paints a painting, a good artist may make a painting look a lot like a human being, but it's still not a photograph. Photograph shows you exactly what you were seeing just moments ago. This is a picture of somebody's once living cell. The way they would make these images is they would actually take, like this is a skin cell, so they took somebody's skin, they froze it, they sliced it, they looked for a slice where the slice had gone right through the middle of a cell. That frozen cell was then put under the electron microscope, and electrons were used to create this picture. And so this human being, whoever it was, this cell, wherever it might have been in the person's skin, this little object was right there. This object was exactly there. Everything you see here is a reflection of reality. Not some artist didn't draw this. This was the reality of it. We know we're looking at the real thing, at exactly what a cell looks like. Now, your textbook takes a bunch of these. What people did was then, if they took enough of these slices and looked at enough cells over time, pretty soon, something that was just sort of two-dimensional here in the picture, you could begin to get an idea of what this thing looked like three-dimensionally. And so now an artist comes along and draws sort of a three-dimensional picture of what all of these things look like. And that's what this picture is in your textbook. This can be helpful because it gives you more of a three-dimensional picture. It's not reality like the electron micrograph is, but it at least gives you this sort of feel for what all of these different structures might really look like. So this can be helpful. One of the places where you'll struggle with this is they call this the generalized animal cell. What does a cell look like in general? Well, it's kind of like saying, what does a human being look like in general? What does the general human being look like? Pretty tough, right? It's pretty plain, pretty blank, right? 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, 2 eyes, 2 ears, we all have those things. But it doesn't give us any idea of the variety, right? There is no cell in your human body that looks like this. This has got a little bit of everything. This is like making the average person and making them look African American, Asian, and white all at the same time. You can't do that. That's kind of what this picture is. This has got parts of all sorts of different cells in it. You wouldn't see a cell really like this. But cells are very different from one another. And again, that's why I've given you just 8 cells that are very, very different from each other to look at. So this is useful, but don't think this is reality. This is just kind of, really, this is here to help us see three-dimensionally what all these organelles kind of look like. All right, so what I want to do now is just have us go down the list, and let's make sure that we can find these various organelles in all of the pictures that you have. So maybe we'll start right here. This is that distal tubule epithelial cell. This happens to be a cell found in some of the little tubes in your kidneys. And let's see if we can identify the cell membrane. Okay, can you find the cell membrane in this picture? Where would you say that cell membrane is? Okay, outside edge, right? Now, I would like you to notice this cell has a ton of cell membrane. Where is all that extra cell membrane? I can see that there's this edge basically around it. But what happens to the edge when we get down here to this part of the cell? Where does it go? It goes in and out and in and out and in and out. This cell has its membrane folded over and over and over and over again so that there's a huge amount of cell membrane in this cell. And that's not so much the point here. The point is that you could locate the cell membrane in this. Could you look through some of your other pictures now? Could you find the cell membrane in every picture? Hopefully this one isn't too difficult. Any of the pictures that you might have questions about? As you look, are you sure you can find it in each picture? Are you okay with all the rest? Everybody found a cell membrane in every picture? Are you okay? Usually I get somebody that asks me about this picture. You know where the cell membrane is here? Is it right along here? Yes? No? Now, what kind of a cell is this? This is a bone cell, right? The little term, anytime you see the little term osteo, you think bones. This is a bone cell. You know, if you think of the bones of your human body, we think of them as sort of hard and rock-like, but down inside all of this bone tissue, there are living cells that are living down. So all of this stuff that you see around here is bone substance. And this little cell is in a little chamber down inside the bone substance. Cell membrane is here, right? This is the edge of the bone forming the chamber, but you can see this is the actual edge of the cell, not the edge of this black stuff. And notice that this has its cell membrane folded into little tentacle-like structures that are going out. Yeah, obviously, if this cell is going to live, it's going to have to get food and nutrients and oxygen, and so they can be passed from cell to cell through these little tubes that were created by their parts of their cytoplasm there. The other one that you should be clear on is this muscle cell. And you'll learn more about this when we discuss muscle, but this is a cell that is so long that we can't fit it on the page unless we made it really, really small. This is a cell that's very long. Most cells are kind of an average size, but this is an odd one. It's very, very long. So what's happened is they've made it big and then just cut it short. So you don't see any cell membrane here or here. These are just the cut edges of the picture. You do see the cell membrane at the top there and down here at the bottom. Are you okay with that? Good. Okay, so if I pointed to a cell membrane in any one of those pictures, no matter which picture shows up on the quiz, if I point to the cell membrane, you should be able to write cell membrane on your answer sheet, right? Right? Good? Okay. Okay, let's go to the second thing then. Okay, so we got a cell membrane. How about the nucleus? How about the nucleus? Yeah, in this picture, the nucleus is this great big structure here, isn't it? Yeah. Now, what I'm going to do when we want to indicate the nucleus here, because the nucleus has parts, and any place I would point on the nucleus, I would be pointing to one of its parts, and you might want to write the answer as the part. What I'm going to do is, if I want you to just tell me the word nucleus, I'm going to put a circle around the whole thing and then point at that artificial circle that I've drawn around it. So this is what it would look like if I'm asking for the nucleus. Right. If I wanted the nuclear membrane, I would be pointing at the membrane. Nuclear envelope. Nuclear membrane, nuclear envelope, either one. Now, there's some things that will help you identify if it is a nucleus. Usually the nucleus is the largest object, but I can't say every single time that might be. So these are what I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for this large object that has sort of a grainy appearance on the inside. Looks like somebody threw a bunch of sand into it. Right? The inside of it is very grainy. That would be number one. Number two, when I'm looking at the boundary of this, sort of the wall that is separating this from everything else inside the cell, I should see two layers to that. If you look closely at the cell membrane, you'll see it's just a single layer of molecules here. Just a single layer here. This wall around, this boundary around the nucleus has two layers to it. So I'm always looking for those two characteristics when I'm looking for a nucleus. Now, with that in mind, look through all 8 pictures. Just real quick, scan through them. Can you see the nucleus? Can you find it in every single picture? Is there any picture that gives you any difficulty? Okay, good. I've got 2 or 3 people holding up this picture. Okay, there we go. Is there more than one nucleus here? There appears to be, doesn't there? The part of the understanding of this is look at the name up here. Okay, polymorphonuclear leukocyte. What does that mean? Okay, the nucleus is actually shaped like this. Poly means many, right? Morpho is shape. Okay, if something morphs, it changes its shape. So this is a many-shaped nucleus, is really what that's saying. So it is a single nucleus, but it bulges like this. Instead of being a nice little round thing, it's got these bulges in it, and the bulges are what show up here. Right? Think of it like this. You know, here's the shape of the nucleus. Okay, if we put the nucleus inside a cell, let's just kind of draw a very, very simple cell. Draw a cell membrane here. Real simple. We got this nucleus in it. Now think, how do we make the picture? We cut through the cell. We freeze it and we slice through it, right? Now what happens when we slice right here instead of maybe right here? You see what happened? The picture that we have then kind of looks like this. In that place where we've sliced through, we cut through these bulges, and so it looks like there's 3 nuclei, even though it's just a single nucleus. So it just has the appearance of having 3 nuclei. It really just has 1. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Whenever you look at one of these electron micrographs, you always have to think, oh, I'm just looking at one slice through the cell, not the entire cell. No, there are some exceptions. Most cells do. Typically, the question was, do all cells have just one nucleus? And The answer is no. There are some cells that have more than one, but they are more rare. Most cells just have a single nucleus. Did you find the nucleus in this picture? Right? Is this the biggest thing right here? Is this the nucleus? It's the biggest thing in the picture. What's wrong with this? Why isn't this the nucleus? Doesn't have a double boundary around it, and it isn't grainy, is it? Where is the nucleus in this picture? Yeah, it's the second biggest thing. Here's an example of one where it's not the biggest object. Now you might want to say, well, what is this big thing? Do you know what adipose is? Anybody? Fat. This is a fat storage cell. This is the cell that stores all that excess energy for you. Fat isn't a big mystery, okay? Your body is specialized to say, if I put some fuel in it and I don't use that fuel, I'm not going to throw it away. If I put some fuel in to make this thing run and I don't use it today, I'm going to save it for tomorrow. And this is where it gets saved. So this is a great big droplet of fat. And the job of this cell is to just store it up for a rainy day. Some day comes along, or a week, and you're just starving, and so we can pull the energy back out of this, and we can fuel your life processes with this. Okay? So, this is not the nucleus. Okay? And just those details that we just said. It doesn't have a grainy interior, no double membrane. It's large, but it's not. Okay. So good. Any other nuclei that you have trouble with there? Okay, so you could answer any of those questions. Doesn't matter which cell I put on the quiz, you've got it, don't you? Okay, good. Let's move on then. Notice that in the outline that the nucleus has 3 parts listed under it, doesn't it? This is why I need to put a circle around the nucleus if I'm going to ask you for that, because any place I would point in the nucleus, I would be touching one of these 3 things, and that could get confusing. Like, if we go back here, we got the cell membrane, we got the nucleus. Now what about the nuclear envelope? Okay, if I'm going to point to the nuclear envelope, I'm going to do this. Right, I'm going to draw the line over, and it's going to stop right there. Now, if this was question number 2, and you saw the line and it just stopped right there, some people might think, oh, that's the nucleus. It's definitely going over to the nucleus. To avoid that confusion, you need to know whenever I'm indicating the nucleus as a whole, I'm just going to draw a circle around it. If I'm touching any one of its 3 parts, then I want you to be more specific. The nuclear envelope is that double-layered boundary around the nucleus. So I'm guessing if you can find a nucleus, you can find a nuclear envelope, can't you? Yeah? Yeah, I'm sure you can. Okay, how about the second one here, chromatin? Chromatin is that general, it's a very general term for all of the other stuff inside the nucleus. All of this sandy, grainy material in here is what we're going to call chromatin. So pointing anywhere inside here is going to be a question that says, tell me chromatin. Now, it may help a little bit to think what chromatin is. Have you heard any biological words that are like this word? Chroma something. Chromosomes, right? Have you ever heard of genes and chromosomes? Taken a biology class, maybe in high school or something? Chromosomes, genes are all genetic material, all DNA. Well, it turns out that chromosomes are just a special sort of way of putting the genetic material together. This picture in your textbook helps a little bit. Here's what you would think of as a chromosome, right? Maybe you know that there are, like in males and females, there's X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, right? If you look closely at a chromosome, though, it's kind of like a sweater. Anybody in here knit? Anybody do any knitting? Right? If you make a sweater, if you knit something, how many pieces of yarn make that thing up? It's just one long piece. I mean, sometimes you have different balls of yarn, but you just tie one piece to the next and you keep going, right? If you unraveled it, if you unravel something, it's just one big, long strand of yarn, isn't it? That you're doing this special little thing with. That's kind of what each chromosome is. If you unravel the chromosome, what you come up with is just one big, giant, long strand of a molecule called DNA, which is the genetic material. And basically, we find this DNA material in one of two states. It's either in its unraveled state like this, or it's in its knitted form like this. This is what happens when a cell is reproducing. The cell is basically gathering up all its DNA so it can give half to one cell and half to another cell when the cell divides into two. But when the cell's functioning, when it's not multiplying, when it's not reproducing, it has all of this DNA unwound so it can get to the genetic codes here and use those codes for its cell processes. Right? So, after cell reproduction, this chromosome unwinds again. And basically, when you have all these strands, if you had all of these strands unwound, think of like a big bowl of spaghetti with all these threads of spaghetti in it, and freeze it, and then slice it in half, and look at where you've cut. What would you see? Right? If you took something here and had all these strands, but then you cut through it, what would you see? You'd see all these little dots, right? Where the little frozen strands had been cut through, right? And it would look very grainy, wouldn't it? So that's really what you're seeing. When you're looking at a cell like this and you see all this graininess here, all that graininess right there is just all the little bits of DNA threads that have been cut through. So that chromatin is basically just, all these threads of DNA that are part of your genetic material. Now the third piece here, the nucleolus. It's basically a word that just kind of means the nucleus of the nucleus, right? So if you look inside here, you'll typically see something here that looks like a distinct object, a nucleus kind of structure inside the nucleus. And so this right here in this picture is the nucleolus. Make sure that you can spell here, right? If you write this word, meaning that you wrote this word, I can't give you credit for it. I usually have somebody in class that says, how well do I have to spell? Do you have to spell well? Should we count spelling or be kind of relaxed with it? Relaxed? I always like to throw that question right back. You're in the hospital someday and the nurse comes in and she's going to write on your, medical records, how well does she have to spell? Can she misspell a few things on your medical record? Can she misspell the name of that drug that you're supposed to be taking? Okay? Unfortunately, these are lots of scientific words, and there are many words that sound like other words, and you need to be able to spell. And this is one of those places where this comes up very early, and I catch on to it. This word has one L in it. This has two L's in it. It spells kind of just like it sounds. Nucleolus. Nucleolus. If you say it and you put the letters that make the sounds that you're saying, You should be able to get very, very, very close to how it's really spelled. Nucleolus. Okay, look through all of your handouts and let's deal with all of these parts. Cell membrane and all the parts of the nucleus. Are we good here? Any questions about any of this? Okay. On the leukocyte. Everybody find a nucleolus there? Okay, do you see the nucleolus here? Did this cell have one? Every cell has a nucleolus. It may not show in every picture. Why? Because this is a single slice, isn't it? And the slice may have gone through the cell at a place where the nucleolus wasn't. So even though you don't see a nucleolus here, and don't mistake a little clump of DNA. The DNA, when you look at this, is kind of condensed in places and relaxed in places. Don't take a little clump of DNA for a nucleolus. It's always a distinct object. Just because you don't see them here doesn't mean that they weren't there. Every cell has them. But they just don't show in these pictures. And likewise, say I use this picture or this picture on the quiz. I couldn't ask you to tell me nucleolus because it isn't there for me to point at. So you have to think, although you need to know all 12 objects here, you may not find every single object in every single picture. Do you see what I'm saying? Don't try your hardest to find every single object in every single picture. What you really want to do is just know, what does a nucleolus look like? Could I always recognize it if it was there? Do I know what a cell membrane and a nucleus looks like? If they're in the picture, can I recognize them? And in reality, every part that we're describing looks so different from every other part that if you miss one of these, you really didn't study. You don't know this. There's only 12 things here. There is no reason for anyone to miss any of these 5 questions on the quiz unless you just didn't study or tried to do it at the last minute that morning right before the quiz. So we're gonna find a lot about how dedicated you are to this class over the weekend here and going into our quiz on Wednesday. Okay, so any questions up to that? Yes. Yeah, how do you know? That in that osteocyte picture, that clump there really looks to me to be just a clump of DNA. Doesn't look like a distinct, it looks too much like everything else around it. It is kind of condensed, but it's kind of grainy like all the other DNA is grainy. It's more spherical, yes. And it just looks different from the chromatin itself. Yeah. So that's kind of what I was saying. Don't mistake a clump. And you know what? I'm not going to point to something questionable. Okay? That's not my intent here. I'm going to point to the obvious things. Okay? Her question in the osteocyte was, there is one sort of big clump-like object in that nucleus, and she was asking, is that a nucleolus? And I was saying, no, it looks too much like just a clump of DNA for us to call it that. But I would totally avoid that so that I wouldn't point to that asking chromatin. It looks, for some people it looks too much like a nucleolus. So it's not the point here. The point is, do you know these regular objects? Not can you distinguish every little tiny thing. On the skeletal one, yes, that is a nucleolus in the skeletal muscle picture. You look at the skeletal muscle picture. right? There is a distinct nucleolus in that. Notice that in that picture too, the nucleus is cut in half too, along with the rest of the cell being sliced through. Good question. See, this is an education. You've got to ask these questions. Otherwise, just go home and read your book, right? Yeah, participate here.
So this one here would be the nucleolus, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. In that skeletal muscle cell, there's that distinct one there. Okay.